Noah Baum, thank you so much for visiting with us here at the Chennai Storytelling Festival. You are a world-renowned expert in especially long-form storytelling, both as a trainer and as a storyteller. So we are very grateful that you are here to lead us in a workshop on this topic. So please introduce yourself fully, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Eric. I shy away from that title, but thank you. I don't see myself at all as an expert, but I'm really here to share a little bit of my experience with you. And in the 90 minutes that we have, we'll see how far we can get. So my name is Noah Baum, and I grew up in Israel. I grew up in the Jewish tradition. And in my tradition, we are taught about tikkun olam. That is a beautiful concept that relates very much to what Heather was just doing with us. We are entrusted to leave the world a better place, to do something to make the world whole again. And to be honest with you, these days, looking around, sometimes it is very, very hard not to fall into despair. But when I feel myself down that slippery slope of despair, I like to remember this little story from my tradition. It is told that the rabbi wanted a new pair of pants for Passover, and he ordered them from the village tailor. But the days went by and the weeks went by, and the pants were not arriving. The rabbi was getting so stressed. And finally, at the very last minute, the tailor arrives with the pants. And the rabbi says, "Oh, thank you so much, but could you just explain to me, how is it possible that it took God only 6 days to create such a complicated world like ours? And it took you more than 6 weeks to make one pair of pants." Taylor looks at the rabbi and smiles. "Rabbi, how can you compare? Take a look at the mess that God made. And then take a look at this fine pair of pants." Well, I'm not here to fix the mess that God made, but I would like to share pointed. You see the wall over there, Noali? That's the old city. The wall surrounds the city all around. No cars can go through. The streets are so narrow, you can jump from roof to roof. And inside, are you listening? Inside, it's divided in 4 quarters. There is the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter. That's where the Wailing Wall is. The last remaining wall of the temple that Solomon built, King Solomon from the Bible. Jews lived there for thousands of years, and now we can't even pray at our own Wailing Wall anymore. We won the war, we have our state, but the old city we had to surrender. When you're older, I'll tell you the stories. So many gave their lives. That's my mother. She's always sighing and talking about dead people and the blood that spilled, and I didn't like it there. I wanted to go home. I was scared of them. They could be watching us from behind those walls. They could shoot us. When my grandmother hears the word Arab, she says, "Tu, nimach shmam. May their name be erased. They took my Yaakov. Nimach shmam." Yaakov was her son. He's gone. Where I come from, we say he fell. Where I come from, the news is on the radio every hour, 24 hours a day, and on the drivers, the buses turn the volume up and all conversations stop. There's always something. bombs, buses blowing up, wars. But there's no choice. So begins my long form story called A Land Twice Promised. It's a show that I created based on the friendship with Jumana, this Palestinian woman that I met at student housing in UC Davis, California. And in this show, I tell our personal stories and the stories of our mothers that echo the contradicting national narratives of our people. Now, this is how the show begins. And I have written a book about it that tells in quite a lot of detail how it's a memoir about my journey from my childhood in Jerusalem and how I came to use storytelling for peace building. And it details how I created this show. But today I'm going to just give you a little bit of an insight on how it all started. So I grew up in Jerusalem, and in 1990, I followed my husband, who is an American, to UC Davis, California for his PhD studies. And I became a mother, and I met Jumana on the playground, as you had just heard. And I discovered that storytelling is not just for children, because before that, that's all I ever did. And in America, I discovered that people are actually telling stories for adults. And I joined the National Storytelling Network. It was not called that at that time, but that's what it is. And then in 2000, I went to my very first conference of the National Storytelling Network, and I presented a workshop there. And I attended a workshop that changed my life. This is why you should join the National Storytelling Network. I took a workshop with Laura Nimi and Elizabeth Ellis on the importance of telling difficult stories. And I sat in that workshop, and I remember just kind of my heart sinking, because I'm realizing that I don't take risks. I don't tell difficult stories. I only tell folk tales. I only tell stories for children. I tell stories that have a happy ending. I never tell personal stories, definitely not about me, because how can I even begin to explain the complex reality of Israel to Americans? And who in the world can even begin to describe my crazy mother? I never thought this is possible. But as I left that workshop, I knew in that deep, deep part of your heart that's right below all the terror and the fear, that if I don't take risks, I'm never going to grow as an artist. So I invited Lauren to give a workshop in Davis, California. And I took some coaching sessions with him, and he encouraged me to start telling the story of my memories of third grade when I was in the 6-Day War. I don't think there was a story there. He kept saying, well, this is something that Americans need to hear. And I thought, God, there's no story there. I mean, we were just in the shelter, in the furnace room. There were bombs falling for 5 days. And I mean, what? But then I realized, wait a minute, I've known this woman now for 7 years. She grew up not even 5 miles away from me. And I never heard what that war was like for her. Did she sleep with all the neighbors in the furnace room like I did? Did Palestinians even have bomb shelters? I realized I don't know anything. I thought it would be a cool idea for her to tell her memories of 67, and I would tell my memories of 67. And so I called her up, and a new chapter in our relationship began. Well, first off, she told me that she's an engineer. She only speaks in public when she gives lectures about water pollution. And she absolutely refused to get up on stage with me, which was my initial idea. But, you know, she agreed to talk. And we started to talk. And I started asking questions, because until now, we've only talked about mom stuff. Yes, I established quite early on that I opposed the occupation. I told her that I always went to demonstrations in Israel against the occupation, but that was it. We never really talked about our childhoods. And suddenly I started asking questions. And for the first time in my life, I started hearing what it's like to be a Palestinian growing up under Israeli occupation. She told me how when she was 10, she saw a boy who was beaten by soldiers, and that was the first time in her life she understood the meaning of the word hate. And hearing this felt like someone just kicked me in the gut, because those soldiers that terrified and haunted her entire childhood were our heroes, our symbol of security. Everyone that I knew that turned 18 and went to the army, including my brother. Suddenly, my people were the them. It was really painful. But I kept listening because she was telling me her story. And so we talked, sharing our stories of our families, our childhoods, our grandmothers. We talked about the history of our people, and I'd say something that was a historical fact, and she'd look at me and say, but no, that's not true at all. That's Zionist propaganda. And then she'd say something that was a historical fact, and I'd say, but that's not true at all. That's Arab propaganda. And we argued. Then she said, look at us. We're getting defensive again. We laughed. I picked up the baby so she could make a soft-boiled egg for the other kids, and we continued to talk. And this experience was so powerful for me. This ability to listen to each other and hold on to our compassion in spite of differences felt earth-shattering to me. I remember thinking, if everyone in Israel could just hear these stories the way I'm hearing them now, we would have peace. See, since arriving in the United States, I didn't want to have anything to do with the politics anymore. I was tired of going to demonstrations. It just made me angry. I wanted to get away from it all. But suddenly, I was listening to these stories, and I took that workshop, you see. So I set out to face my fears. But I knew that I couldn't do it alone. So I want to just read to you the part about that from this is my book, my memoir. So this is the part that tells you how it all started. I knew I had to somehow create stories from this powerful experience of our conversations, but I was terrified. I'd never told personal stories before in Hebrew or English. There was just a little anecdote about my grandmother I once added to a story. I've never told anything difficult or controversial in my life. I just adapted folk tales. How in the world would I take these endless, roaming, intimate, heart-to-heart conversations and turn them into a story? How could I translate this intense experience, all these emotions and contradictions, into anything coherent that would resonate with others? Even more perplexing, how in the world could I tell the stories of a Palestinian? How dare I give voice to the story of my enemy? How in the world could I tell a story about the terrifying soldiers and the occupying army while these are my people? I anxiously called Lauren Nimi. We've been talking for weeks, and I have to do something with these conversations, I said breathlessly. I have no idea how or what, but I must find a way to tell these stories so that others will experience this shared humanity. It's powerful. I don't know how to describe it. It's just amazing what we have together. I have no idea where to start. Will you help me? I don't think he had any idea what he was getting into when he said yes. And so Lauren became my guide and my mentor in this long, long process. And with his and also, I just loved what Heather said in her piece about, she thought, is there something better I can do with my skill set rather than go to demonstrations? And it's exactly how I felt. It's exactly how I felt. And my skill set was telling stories, but this seems overwhelming. How? What do I do? So I'm going to just share my screen with you for a minute. Everybody still okay? Because you're just tiny little boxes. Yes, just give me a thumbs up. Okay. Okay. Let me just put you on the screen so I can see you too. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if you can. Okay, you can all see my screen. So I knew I wanted to do something as a storyteller. I wanted to do something with these conversations, but how? What? How do we tell a story that feels too big? How does one create a story about political or controversial topics? How do we talk about the unspeakable, the pain? There's so much pain. There's so much ancestral trauma in our families, in our stories, in our national narratives. Where to begin? The wonderful, one of my favorite poets, Wisława Szymborska, the Polish Nobel laureate, has a poem that I absolutely love. And this is just part of this poem. It's called Big Numbers. 4 billion people on this earth. But my imagination is as it was. It doesn't cope well with big numbers. It's still moved by singularity. As humans, it's overwhelming for us to connect with big concepts, right? The Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Ah! We're able to connect only with things that we can imagine, relate to. So we need singularity. We are moved by singularity. And I knew that the key to this was to find, to connect people with the singularity of my experience with Jumana in these conversations and the stories that emerged from these conversations. And so with Lauren's guidance, I started recording our conversations. And then I had pages upon pages upon pages of transcribed conversations and translations of our mother's stories. And together with Lauren, and it's a long story of how that came to be. Again, you can read about it in the book, but together we started identifying and unveiling the stories within. So I came up with 4 main monologues, 4 main sections. At the time, I didn't know it was monologues yet. So the first one was Jumana's story. So in her memories, we identified 2 major stories that felt pertinent, going from the present to the past. So the present, was our meeting, and then going to, so 1981, she told me a story about how she was arrested when she was at university at 17. And then she told me a story about being in 5th grade in 1974 and trying to get to the bus inside the walls of the old city when there was a demonstration. And that was the time, then that time that she felt the word hate. Then there's my story, which is my memories of the 1967 war when I was in 3rd grade, when I was 8. And then there was Jumana's mother's story. She also told her memories of the 67 war, but now it was from the perspective of a mother, while mine was the child. She was a young mother with 3 little babies and separated from her husband, who she didn't know if he's dead or alive. And then through that, she also told there were the trauma and the memories of 1948. And then there was my mother's story of 1948, stories that I grew up with all my life, of the 1948 war, when she was 19 years old, volunteering inside the walls of the old city, and then coming out, discovering that her brother, who is the pillar of her life, was killed. Later on, I added the opening, that you just heard, and there were transitional pieces between these main monologues that go back to the present, our encounter in the 1990s. So it goes back and forth from the present to the past, from the present to the further past, from the present to the even further past. So that became kind of the structure. And then there was an ending that we added. So the performance piece that I created, called A Land Twice Promised, is designed to expand a listener's ability to appreciate paradox when, simultaneously opposites can be true. Yeah. So it's designed to appreciate paradox and complexity. And by the way, this description of my piece is by Heather Forrest, because I would never have been able to say that about my own work, but she saw it, and then she said, "This is what you're doing." And it turns on the way that the same events can be seen simultaneously from many points of view. So you're getting the views of the child, and views of the mother, and views of the Israeli, and views of the Palestinian, and views of the grandmothers. And so it kind of gives you a lot of the different perspectives. There's a wonderful line in Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, the poet. "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." So my book gives a very, very detailed description of this whole process, including the many doubts and the endless demons that I wrestled with. But today, for this little encounter, I want to share with you a few of the challenges and the choices that I made when I was creating a long form story from oral history. So Heather showed us how she creates a long form story from science, yes? But mine is from oral history, yes, from memories of other people that are also connected to the history of our people. My hope is that you will be inspired by this to find solutions that are right for the story that you want to tell, as we all strive to learn to tell the stories that may feel too big or too difficult, but are so, so important. So the brutality of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict always prevails newspapers and headlines. And there's so much hopelessness and despair of our two people. I knew that I didn't want to create a political manifesto or some Hollywood schmaltz. That was the only thing I knew when I began. I knew I needed to create stories, and I knew I didn't want it to be some sort of a, political manifesto, and I didn't want it to be some sort of a schmaltzy, oh, look at us, we're enemies and now we're friends kind of thing. I really didn't want that. I wanted to find a way to give people a glimpse into the human story that is so much more complex and is not black and white. The human story that is beyond and beneath the shrill and the rhetoric and the headlines. I wanted to find a way to create for others the experience of compassion that Jumana and I experienced as we were listening to these stories. So the first choice that I had to face, other than run out of the room screaming, is how to tell these stories. Who is telling the story? And as I was working on it, I had all these versions of me being, the all-knowing narrator. And other than my memories of the 67 war, I'm telling Jumana story and her mother's story and my mother's story in third person. So, Jumana was her mother. So it's a third person narrative. And it just didn't feel right. I was working on it with Lauren. He said, get up and do it. And I got up and I started doing it, still holding the paper because, it was all like all these drafts and it just felt weird. It just didn't feel right. And then he said, well, try first person. And I'm like, what? I can't, I'm not a palace. I can't do that. But then I realized this is how I felt when I listened to her. This is how we feel when we listen to someone who we love, right? When we listen to someone that is our friend or that we love, we immediately empathize. We immediately imagine, well, how would this be for me? And so it became clear that if I wanted the experience of compassion to come through for my listeners, I had to tell it as a first person narrator. So I had to create 4 monologues, not just 4 stories. And in this way, people will hear it as close as possible to the way that we heard it. But then, of course, connected with that was, how can I tell about the other? And in my case, the enemy, right? Who am I to tell somebody else's story? What right do I have? It was hard enough as an Israeli to hear about her life living under occupation that my people are doing. And it was hard enough to hear about those hated soldiers that are my people. How can I tell that as if it was me? Well, there's only one way to do that. A lot of research. I asked a lot of questions, a lot of questions. I kept an open heart. I stayed away from judgment. And then I used my skill set as an actress. And I put myself in the shoes of the other. And the minute I did that, it became an even more powerful experience for me of compassion than was the experience of just listening to her. So the minute I started telling the stories in first person, it felt right. It just felt right. I want to share with you, everyone still here? Give me a thumbs up, okay? I want to share with you another little excerpt from Jumana's story, just so that you can see a little bit of how I did that. And then afterwards, use that story to highlight a few more principles that guided me in the shaping of this piece. So this is an excerpt from her story from 5th grade. Never done it on Zoom. This is so weird. Okay. My school, it was the girls' school, the private Catholic school inside the Christian quarter of the old city. And every day I would go with my little sister Nadia, and Nadia, my friend, and her little sisters. And we would get off the bus outside the gate, Bab al-Amud. The tourists call it Damascus Gate. And from there, it was not far to walk to the school, but you had to go through the souk, the market. Remember the souk? I love the souk. Always so full of people and so colorful, and the dresses, how they hang above the shop, like the shops like curtains, and the mountains of sticky sweets, the halkoum, the baklawa, and the little camels and the donkeys made of olive wood, the polished olive wood. I always wanted one of those. But you know, they were for the tourists, the tall blonde men and the skinny ladies. I never understood how they could show so much skin, you know? The way the men in the market looked at them, I would be so embarrassed. But I loved looking at the tourists. If I wasn't such a good girl, I would probably be in the market all day long, in the souk, just looking at them. But I was such a good girl. I was never even late to school. One day, it was in 5th grade, and it was recess. It was the beginning of the summer. And suddenly, they were banging on the school gate. We thought it was the soldiers, but it was the boys from the public school. They were saying, Ta'alu, Tajaru, come, protest. It was the beginning of the commemoration for the 67 war. They were starting something, a demonstration. They would sneak through the alleyways, see where a soldier is standing, throw a rock, run away, sneak through another way, try to get almost like a daring game, who can get the closest without being caught. But at our school, the nuns, they didn't allow that at all. They knew that there was going to be some trouble because the soldiers, they get upset and they start to shoot and they toss tear gas, and then they put a blockade around the old city. You could get stranded inside the walls and not be able to go home. So the headmistress, she said, school is over now, girls, go home, be quick. I grabbed my little sister. Nadia took her sisters. When these things happen, we run to Nadia's father. He has a shop not far from the school. And from there, he takes us to the safest way to the bus, because you never know what the boys are going to be or the soldiers will show up. So we ran really, really fast, and we got there, and Nadia was banging on the door. Baba! Baba! But it was locked and dark. Nobody was there. And from the other side of the alley wall, we heard, Hunak! Over here. Dirbalak! Be careful. Allahu Akbar! God is great. And we heard the sound of stones picking on metal. And my little sister, she started to grab my skirt and to say, I want to go. I want to go to Mama. I want to go now. And Nadia looked at me and I looked at Nadia. It was up to us now. We were the oldest. We were in 5th grade. And I grabbed my little sister. I figured we have to get away from that alley wall, that's for sure. And we started to run really fast to the souk. I figured we have to just get to the souk from there. It's not far to the bus, and it's safer with all the tourists. So I ran so fast. I've never run so fast in my life. We ran down the last alley, down the curve of the steps of the last alley. And we came down to the bottom of the alley, and it was the souk. And it was quiet like a graveyard. All the shutters were closed. No tourists. No dresses. And I remember there's this quiet right before they start shooting. And my little sister, she was pulling my skirt and crying, I want to go home. I want to go home to Mama. And Nadia looked at me, we have to hide. And I wanted to use this excerpt to talk about some of the most important, I don't know how to describe it, challenges or elements or principles that I feel are crucial when you work on any story, but in particular, when you work on a long form story like this one. So I'm going to share my screen again. So the first challenge is about creating a sense of place. Donald Davis, the prominent storyteller, says, to tell a story without place is like trying to hold water in a sieve. Place is a container of story. The first unconscious question that a story that the listener asks when they sit down to listen to a story is not what's going to happen next, is not what is the plot. The first question is, where am I? In order to be able to go with you, the storyteller, on a journey. I, the listener, need to know where I am. I need to be oriented. Unless I'm oriented, I don't know where to go. And if I don't know where to go, I'm not going to go with you. I'm not going to trust you. And if your listener is not going with you, if the listener doesn't come with you on a journey, there's no story, because the story only exists in the imagination of the listener and how we create that together. So listeners need to feel safe. They need to know where they are. The place is crucial. It's the container of the story. Now, one of the challenges, of course, of a long form story is that it has multiple places. And so I have to pay attention to create that sense of place and make it very, very clear, especially if I'm going through many timelines and many, characters, where am I at any given moment has to be crystal clear. And that was one of the biggest challenges, because there's always a gap between how we talk when we reminiscent, or when we remember things, or even when we have a conversation, and what my audience ultimately needs to be able to create a sense of place. So there's a conscious translation that we as artists need to make to create a sense of place. So for example, Jumana and I, when we talk about the souk, she doesn't describe it to me. She doesn't need to. All she has to say, the Christian Quarter in the Old City, I nod. So every day we go Damascus Gate, and we go through the souk, I've been there. I know what it looks like. She doesn't need to say anything. But when I'm creating a story from these memories, excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water. When I'm creating a story from these memories, and I want my listeners to know where they are, I have to take into consideration that I'm talking to people who don't know what an Israeli and Palestinian are, don't know what Jerusalem is, don't know what the old city is, don't know what a souk is, have never been there. I have to take all that into consideration. Even if I'm talking to an audience that's all Israelis, I have to take into consideration that maybe not all of them have been in the old city in Jerusalem and have seen the souk. So the description of the souk that you heard today is not the words of Jumana. It's the words of the storyteller. I had to put those words in her mouth in that monologue, because the sense of place is so crucial. Another example is with my mother. You heard at the beginning, my mother describing the old city. That again is something I had to describe for my listeners. Yes, my mother told me that the old city is the streets are very narrow, that you have to jump from roof to roof. Those were her words, because at the time, as a little child, I've never been there. After 1967, I did go in there. She told me that it's divided into 4 quarters, but she didn't need to explain to me what the Wailing Wall is. From the moment I was born, I breathe in the concept of the Wailing Wall. I'm an Israeli Jew. I'm the daughter of my mother. I hear about it all the time. I know about the Wailing Wall, but my listeners don't. So I had to put in that line, the last remaining wall of the temple that Solomon built, King Solomon, from the Bible. So again, that is my addition as the storyteller. And so there's many, 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 many examples of this in my entire piece, because for my listeners to come with me, I need to intentionally craft the sense of place. And one other example I want to give you. So, for example, my Palestinian friend's mother, she told her story in Arabic, and my friend translated it, and then I asked many, many questions. But for me to be able to tell the story of her mother in first person, I needed to get the sense of place. I've passed through their neighborhood. I had a general idea of what it looked like. So I gave that description in one of my transitions. Yeah. So she says, she's asking me, do you know Shuafat? And I said, yeah, we passed through there. The laundry drying on the flat roofs, the stone terraces. So I gave that description. But then her story describes the house. It describes where they slept during the bombings, because they didn't have a furnace room like I did. They all slept in a corridor at the bottom floor of their neighbor, which was the only place without windows. So all these things, in order for me to imagine, and I had to know them to the last detail so that I could describe them, so I could take my listeners with me. So I had Jumana draw me a detailed map of the house with every room, like a blueprint of an architect. Every room, where is the bed? Where's the window? Where's the veranda? Where's the door? Where's the table? Everything. A detailed map of the village. Where is this person's house? Where is this person's house? Where's Abu Salim's house? Where is Haj Mahmoud's store where she bought the flour? All this I worked on. I had maps upon maps and drawings so that I could really, really see it in my mind, because then I could invite my listeners to come to the place with me. Of course, I didn't have to describe to my listeners, where's the table and where is the wall. It was enough that I saw it. So I think that is that point. So when you're working on a long form story, you have to pay attention and craft the sense of place very, very intentionally. And connected to that, which I just started talking with you about, are the details. So the details are super important. Again, a lot of times when we talk, when we tell our memories, there's so much that we see in our mind that we don't utter in words. We don't describe, because we take it for granted. But when you are taking this story and you're trying to really describe it to listeners who have not been there, you have to start giving form to all the unspoken things in our mind. So when Jumana and I were talking, I would stop and ask her, right? So what did this look like? And how did you feel? So I interviewed her for hours and hours and hours. But one really great example about this is, so she tells me the story about the demonstration that you just heard about her. And she says, the boys, they were saying, Ta'alu, Tajaru, come demonstrate. They were starting a demonstration. And so I go home and I write the whole scene the way I imagine it. So the word demonstration, right? So how do I picture the word demonstration from my world, from what I know? So for me, the word demonstration meant, what I was seeing on TV, crowds of young men and young boys and some women in the back, walking arm in arm in the narrow alleys of the old city, holding banners, waving flags, yelling. This was my image for demonstration. So I described it. So, and then I come back to her and I read to her the scene that I created, and she starts laughing. Says, no. This is before the first Intifada. So again, when she said demonstration, of course, she has it in her mind what it looked like, but she doesn't think that I need to know that, right? Before the first Intifada. So the way I imagined it, the first Intifada was the first uprising. This is how demonstrations happen. But before that, and then she described, said it was like a daring game. Who could get the closest without getting caught? They would sneak out through the alleyways. They would drop their backpacks, throw a stone where a soldier is standing, run away, sneak through another alley. So then I had to incorporate that description. Okay. So every moment in the story that was not my story, right? That was her story or her mother's story. I had to go back and forth a lot to get all the details. The war broke the next day. It actually happened on the day before. The day before, they were at the church and there was this whole event. And then they left there and she said to him, I'm really scared. I want to go and buy some flour. And he said, no, there's no time now. We have to get back home and don't worry about it. There's not going to be any war. but when I'm creating the story, I need to remember that for my audience to, I need to describe to them where Muna is, their house and the neighborhood and how he goes to the bus and everything. If I had to take them to another place before, it's a lot. It's a lot to hold on. It's a lot to describe, and it's a lot emotionally and mentally to go through. Yeah. So I consolidated it. So I took what he said the night before and I put it in his mouth the following day. Same goes with characters. At the time, they had the 3 little kids and they had his niece. They had their niece with them, who was 13 years old, because on the farm, it was too hard to concentrate and she had to study for her exams. So all through the war, she was with them. But there were already so many characters in that story because it was Muna and her 3 children, and it was Abu Salim's wife, and the other neighbor, and Mustafa, the woman who owned the corridor without windows. So there was all these names and characters that I'm communicating through the story to my listeners. I need to be conscious. And so I asked myself, is the character of that 13-year-old important to the truth of the story, to the emotional truth of the experience? And I came to a conclusion that no, that it will just be an overload. It would be an overload. And so that character disappeared from the story, though in reality, she was there. There's another example like that from my mother's story. There's a very dramatic moment in the story of my mother when she's 19, she volunteers to help at the hospital inside the old city during the siege. And she sees a wounded man and she goes to give him water. And as she gives him the water, it turns out he's already dead, but she doesn't notice it. So the nurse yells at her. And I always thought, oh God, for me, it was kind of a moment that brought the reality of this 19-year-old to my heart. Of course, my mother doesn't talk like that. She always keeps the emotions somewhere over there, hidden under a lot of drama. But for me, that moment was crucial. However, in reality, that moment did not happen on the first day that she came. It actually happened on the last day, and the man was somebody she knew. And he was still alive when she saw that he needed water. And she went to get the water. And by the time she brought the water, he had died, but she didn't notice. And she was giving him the water, and it was dribbling. And so everything that happened, I described, it just didn't happen at exactly the same moment. And I had to delete the fact that she knew him because that was a whole other story. And there were so many things happening in her story already. So you get the idea. So my intention, our intention when we create a story, is always to stay true to the spirit and the sense of the experience, rather than just an accurate chronological account of events. Okay, so in service of the story, in service of the drama of it, in service of keeping my audience with me, this is what we need to do. And the last thing that I want to talk about is that the big challenge of a long form story is really how we hold the attention over such a long period of time. My show is 80 minutes long. That's a long time. And for me, again, you have to find variety, because if you're doing the same thing, people stop listening. And as you saw with Heather, she goes from speaking to drama with the phone to singing. So when you create variety, when you create a dynamic and a constant dynamic of change, the listeners stay with you. So I move between four monologues. I move between time zones. I move back and forth, present to the past, present to the past. I move between different characters. I change my voice. So this dynamics keeps it interesting, and it helps keep the attention of listeners, even if it's a very, very long story. There is so much more to talk about. We just don't have time in this format. There is the discovering common humanity in images. There's the whole image-driven language. How do we structure the story according to the emotional arc? And then there's the whole chapter in my book about the challenges of crafting and telling my own mother's story. So all that is in the book. If you really want to get into it, if you really want to learn about everything that I did. And it's important to remember that a long form story from oral history is just one type of long form story. Yeah. I also create long form stories that weave a folktale and a personal story. And that's a whole other workshop. But what's most important is that storytelling is a powerful tool that we have. Whether we're wanting to highlight current issues, what's happening with our planet Earth, or history, or politics, because inviting someone into a story provides more understanding than an argument, no matter how much fact or logic is in the argument. And it can inspire people to action. It can spark dialogue. It really has a tremendous power. So I want to share this wonderful quote with you from David White, who's one of my favorite Irish poets. To become human is to become visible by giving what is hidden onto others. There are many stories that we hold, and some can feel too big and can be overwhelming. But it is our job, and particularly as storytellers, it is our job to give what is hidden to others. And we can do that. This is our skill set. We can bring the singularity into light and allow our listeners to connect with their own imagination so that it can connect with their heart. So what I'd like to do now is just invite you to some reflections in the breakout room, and really, we're not going to start working on long form stories today, but I would like to invite you to a rather short discussion in your breakout room with, two other people. So Eric, if we can put people in groups of 2 or 3, that would be great. And I want you to choose one of these to talk about. Please, you're welcome to talk about all of it if you have time, but I want you to just share with your group, is there something in your life right now, or maybe you've been carrying it now for many years, that feels too big to tell? And I don't want you to start telling the whole story to your partners, but just talk about it. And why are you drawn to it? What is it about this that feels big, but that feels important, or that feels that you really want to talk about it? And it doesn't have to be anything political or controversial, or it doesn't have to be big. It could be, I just feel like I've always wanted to tell a story about my grandmother, and it just feels too big, because her life is huge, and there's so much there about, I don't know, the immigrant experience, the relationship between the generations, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm just making things up now. But that's what I'm asking you to do in your breakout room. So just, why am I drawn to this? And maybe you're thinking, maybe there's somebody in my life right now that, or that I'm curious about. And you just, this presentation of mine inspired you to think, oh, maybe I could interview someone and see if I can create stories from that, because this person's life is so important, and the issues are important to me, or whatever. So just this is a chance to just process and talk with your partners. Please make sure that everybody has time to speak. I'm going to give about 4 minutes per person. Okay, so I'm going to time it on my end and send out a broadcast that it's time for the next person to speak, or you can put a timer in your group. So don't spend hours on introducing yourself and what you do and blah, blah, blah. Just jump right into sharing, something around this stuff that I just suggested here. And if nothing here is something you want to talk about, and you just want to talk about anything that you thought about this presentation, you are welcome to do that as well. Eric, are we ready to send people out?
Yes, let's go to gallery view. I'm going to remove the spotlight from you. Yeah, if everybody can choose gallery view, that will be.
Why does that matter? Can you put them in? Are you going to put them in breakout rooms?
I am, and I'm just seeing how many people have their cameras on. What I've done is because about half the people have their cameras off.
It doesn't matter. Let's not spend time on that, because I still have lots to do when they come back.
I'm opening the room.
If you would like to open your camera in your group, please do. If you don't want to open your camera and you just want to speak, please do. It's really not important right now. I just want you to have about 4 minutes each to share. And if you just joined us and you don't know what we're talking about, you could just listen to your partners. So,
okay, Noah, you'll probably end up in a room also. So please come back to the main room if you like.
Okie doke, no problem.
Okay, here we go.
So wait. Okay, but I want them to be 3 in a room. Are you able to do that?
No, there's more than 3 in a room, because many people have their cameras turned off, and experience tells that if they have their cameras turned off, they may not even be at their computer.
No, Eric, could you please not put more than 3 people in a room? It's we're not going to work on. Yeah,
I'll do that, but a number of people will end up alone in a room and will come to the main room. But okay, I'll do that. Okay, so let's see. There are.
I see there's things in the chat, but folks, I can't focus on the chat when I'm talking, so I really apologize.
Okay, I'm putting, some rooms have 3, some rooms have 4. Is that okay?
Okay. People with 4 in a room will just have to talk faster. Okay.
Okay, here we go. Hello, Natalie. How are you? How did you not get sent to a room? Let's see. Oh, so now I think everybody is in a room.
Noah, this is fabulous. This is Angela.
Thank
I
you.
just love being here with you.
Oh, thank you, my darling.
Giving you a big hug and a really just thank you so much for this work and sharing it. It's just brilliant.
I love you.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. So lovely.
So I thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I was hoping we will hear a little bit from folks. I have just a couple of minutes. If somebody wants to very shortly share with us, not everything that they were talking about in their group, but how is this experience for you? The reflection, Did you discover, did it inspire you to start thinking about something or keep working on something that you were immersed in? So if anybody would like to share, just you can raise your hand in the reaction button, and hopefully you'll show up on my screen.
And I hope everybody is in gallery view. If you're not in gallery view, please click on gallery view.
Yes, Yvonne, go ahead. Just unmute.
One thing I observed is that listening to one another seemed to give permission to the others to say things they might not have said otherwise.
Awesome. In your little group. Yes. Thank you so much. Meher, am I pronouncing it right? Thank you. Yes.
No, actually, I had a question rather than a sharing. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Sorry. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding us that we can ask questions as well.
Yeah. I noticed when you were telling the personal story from someone else's point of view, I saw how you were imbibing probably their style or the way they talk into your telling. How important is that? Because what happens is when we tell a personal narrative, say I interview someone and I interview a gentleman whose story I would like to tell, then how important is it that I imbibe that person's tonality or the way the person talks? Or obviously, it's not possible to have the same voice, but I wanted to understand from a delivery point of view how important it is.
Yeah, that's a super important question. So for me, because I had 4 main monologues, I had 4 main characters, it was very important for me to figure out a way to distinguish them, and to distinguish them physically and to distinguish them vocally. But it was also very important for me that this is not about imitating them. So it was very, very important for me that I'm not there to imitate the way they talk. I'm not doing an impersonation. Yeah, this is not Saturday Night Live doing, Hillary Clinton. I'm not doing that. That was very, very clear to me. I didn't want to do that. That's not what I'm into.
Yeah.
But how do I distinguish the characters? So for me, it was the rhythm. Jumana speaks super, super, super fast. I had to slow her down for people to understand her. But when I first started performing on stage, I was speaking super fast. So her rhythm was very different. Her Arabic accent is very subtle. It's not as heavy as her mother's. Her mother doesn't speak English very well, and her accent in English was very, very heavy. So that I did that. With my mother, it was interesting because, of course, my mother doesn't tell me stories in English. She doesn't talk to me in English. She talks to me in Hebrew. So I created my mother's voice again with her rhythm, with her mannerisms, and with her as she speaks English, which she speaks English with a very heavy Israeli accent. So I tried to give the spirit of the person, the quality of their rhythm and their voice, but not to imitate them. So that was what was important for me, because I didn't want this to become a caricature.
Sure. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or anybody that wants to? Gilly, yes, hi.
Hello, Noah. Thank you so much for that. It's deeply moving. I'm from South Africa, and I think what resonates very deeply for me is I'm second generation post-apartheid or apartheid. And so as a white privileged South African, the question for me is... The bagel is ready. The question for me then is, how is someone, how did you go through the process of wanting to tell another story? Because the sense here is, and I can understand, and it's coming to grips with it, is that there's a lot of pain and anger and suffering from people of color. And there's the question of who are you to tell the story here in this country and without appropriating someone else's pain.
Yeah. So this was a huge question for me.
Yes.
And if you read the book, you'll see there's pages upon pages of agony around that. There's the voices in my head, there's the demons. The bottom line was that I had permission of this particular person to do this, right? I would never do that if I didn't.
Yeah.
She felt very strongly. She didn't want to get up on stage to tell a story with me, but she gave me her permission for me to do that. And she felt very strongly that she wanted those voices out there, that she wanted those stories to be heard, and that I was the vehicle that she trusted. Of course, she always said to me, if we hadn't had those 7 years of getting to know each other, she would have never told me any of those stories. So that trust took a lot of time. And it was really, I didn't do anything without her permission. And I didn't do anything without, and especially for me, because I did stories of living people. All our parents were alive at the time. So in 2003, I had my first work in progress, or 2002, I had my first work in progress at the library in Davis, where I was just trying it out. And her parents were there. And oh my God, it was the most nerve-wracking show of my life. But afterwards, and again, I write about it in the book, her mother made the best meal in the world for me. I mean, it was just, they were very grateful. And she said afterwards that she called all the uncles and to tell them that there are Jews that are good. And then I put that in the show too. Yeah.
So thank you for that. It inspires me and it encourages me just to hear your process, how you've been through it. It inspires me to look out for the book as well, because it's such an important part of it. So thank you so much for sharing.
It's very, very important. So I have time just for one more person. Radhika, would you like to? Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Assalamu alaikum, Noah.
Assalamu alaikum.
So I recently relocated from Oman to Sri Lanka. It's been about a year. So I'm originally Sri Lankan, but I've been trying to disconnect from my motherland because of the 30-year-old war. And for me, so I am from a different race, but for me, I have, I don't know, I am more identifying with, two other races who have, number one race was the Tamils, who have been in the war, the 30-year-old war. So, and also, so I want to be able to tell their story, but how do I say it? Because also I do therapy work, and I've realized that there's so much PTSD, even amongst little kids, and, they have invited me to come to the north of Sri Lanka to do some workshops and stuff like that. So there's so much, unspoken. So how do I say it, in a general form, or should I pick a character and get close like the way you did? Or
that's a big question, and I believe like Wisława Szymborska, right? The singularity. My mind. There's 4 billion people in the world. I cannot hear the story about their aches and pains in a way that will connect me unless I can connect with one specific ability to imagine. So, for me, it just happened. I didn't set out to do it, but it happened, and it came organically out of our relationship. So I guess I would just invite you to do a lot of research, find sources, get permission, interview people, and then it will depend on how you frame it and how you, what you do with it. But the singularity is always important. I really believe in that. I am going to share my screen one last time to just remind us a couple of things that are coming up. So first, to remind you that I really, really hope you come out of this knowing that we all have stories that are important. Some can feel too big to tell, but it is the work of the artist to bring the unspeakable, to go into those hard to tell stories, and to bring out the dark and the light, to bring out the complexity, to bring it out into the world. It is our work. It is what we are here for. And as David White said, to become human is to become visible by giving it what is hidden to others. And I also want to remind you that I did not do this alone. It is impossible, and I didn't, and I couldn't. So without Lauren Nemi, it would never have happened. And I had many, many others that helped me. I took many workshops. I took many coaching sessions. I worked with Gay Ducey. I worked with Elizabeth Ellis. I worked with Doug Lippman, who helped me with enormous emotional breakthroughs with my story with my mother. I worked with Dorothy Cleveland. I worked with Megan Wells. I worked with my dear friend and theater director, Mickey Mevorach in Israel. So I did not do this alone. And I don't believe in working alone, whether it's a short story or a long story, but in particular, if you're working on long-term, I believe we all need the support and the help of others. And I want to invite you all to a couple of upcoming events. One, I'm very proud to be part of a women's festival happening in March, and it's going to be in person in Virginia and live streaming. So if you buy a ticket, you get the live streaming for a month. So you can watch anytime. And it's just an amazing group of artists. And Heather Forrest is also going to be there, which I'm super excited about. And I really invite you, if you're interested in learning more about how to craft a personal story from a memory. This is not focusing on long form, but it is a class that I offer, teaching how you can tell your personal story and inspire others. And it's 4 Fridays in April. And I'm going to put all that in the chat in a minute. If you are interested, I also have a TEDx talk that talks about this stuff. And this is my website. I'd love for you to stay in touch. This is the book that I was talking about and the TED Talk. And I have a new book for children, completely not related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or long form. And it's just really fun. And I'm very proud of it. So that's the end of my spiel. And I'm going to just put all those links in the chat if you are interested. And I hope to see you all again. And thank you, Eric, for this just amazing feat of organizational leadership. And I want to invite all of you to just stay, because the next session is what I came here for today, to hear my fellow Jewish storytellers create a wonderful example of a long folktale and showing you their interpretation. So it should be really, really cool. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Noah. That was thrilling. And left all of us with a lot to think about.